So we might begin actually, because time's going to run out. So Lou, I might hand over, thank you very much, to the prayers.
Opening prayers, taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds, and may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the area triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed into concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om, Gate Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi, Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. The praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text symbolic of the seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son. All creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dhamma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. You whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed 10 stages achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning, I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatsanadi, with the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. By the virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas visualized before me, this mandala built on a base resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon, may all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering, without attachment, my body, enemies, friends and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dhammakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nayatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious gurus.
Thank you very much. It's 38 degrees here in Melbourne. It's going to go up to 39 or even 40 today. So if I'm looking a bit flushed, it's because the room is like an oven. And it's quite extraordinary. But anyway, I'm going to begin with a quotation from a sutra, and I'm using this to kind of frame our motivation. So in the sutra on chanting the Dharma together, it says, by seeing the Dharma, they see the Buddha. By seeing the Buddha, they see all sentient beings. By seeing sentient beings, they see causes and conditions. By seeing causes and conditions, they see emptiness. Seeing emptiness is not seeing, Blessed One. Not seeing anything is seeing everything. It is correct seeing. End of quote. So this marvelous quote is from quoted by Shantideva in his training anthology. And I selected it because I think it encapsulates the manner in which the topics we're currently studying cascade one into the next in such a way that by understanding one, we're opening the door to understanding the next. So in other words, we're being invited to look and explore how all the verses link together and work in a kind of consort or a concert in order to illuminate our overall topic. So you appreciate that even at a glance, the Dharma, by understanding the Dharma, we can understand the Buddha. And by understanding the Buddha, we can understand sentient beings, because sentient beings are by definition not Buddhas. And he's seeing the situation, the unenlightened and suffering situation of sentient beings. We recognize that their suffering is structured according to causes and conditions, such as karma and delusion. And because karma and delusions are dependent arisings, they are thus empty. To see emptiness directly without the mediation of a conceptual image is to fathom it in a non-dualistic fashion, in a state of meditative absorption on ultimate reality itself, at which time no conventionalities appear. This is the only mind, this mind that's in non-conceptual direct meditative equipoise on emptiness, is the only mind that is able to cut the afflictions from their root. There's also a precious clue here as to how we can come to see the Buddha. It is by actualizing the Dharma in our own minds. On this basis, we can see how a state of a Buddha can definitely arise if our mind is developed appropriately, while also endeavouring to practice the perfections and thus perform marvellously skilled actions with single-pointed dedication. So this is the great task that is enticing us. If causes and conditions didn't determine our various states of being, in other words, if they were not dependent arisings, then there'd be in no sense would there be a path and a goal of the path. Buddhas would be Buddhas, and sentient beings would be sentient beings, and never the twain would meet. With suffering established as eternal, because this would be a consequence of things existing from their own side, there would be no role for compassion, love, generosity, ethical practice, and so on. The whole idea, let alone the purpose of the Bodhisattva's deeds, would be rendered utterly meaningless, utterly superfluous. Likewise, the very notion of refuge and how we might adopt it as the very crux of our lives, because would be without value. So this really leads us into Shantideva's treatment of the topics in chapter 2. Earlier in chapter 2, Shantideva has presented how we prostrate with our mind by making unbelievable offerings to the Triple Gem. And you'll recall that great emphasis was placed on how we can imagine offering, how we can offer imaginatively. and also how we could extend our offerings to include those that weren't personally possessed. So in this way, we embrace the entirety of things to offer without leaving anything out. It's quite remarkable to consider this. Then Shantideva mentioned how we prostrate with our speech. And here a prostration with our speech is saying that we're offering our speech, and we're offering our speech in the form of prayers, as we've done at the beginning of this session. That's an offering using our voice as an instrument to offer prostrations verbally to the triple gem. Even our tongue, our lips, our throat, and the air that we use to create sound is an instrumental part of this offering. So you can see how everything is interlinked here in a very beautiful way. All of this energy that we're gathering together is being offered at that moment. We also know from the teachings of the refuge practice and also the instruction on how to recite the refuge formula that we also imagine ourselves as the chant leader, leading the prayers on behalf of all sentient beings. And we can actually visualize all sentient beings in various ways gathered around us and feel very strongly that we're their representative. Without leading the prayers for them, they would be unable to offer verbal prayers to the Buddhas. So we take that role, responsibility upon ourselves and become the chant master. So these are very, very powerful techniques. And although they're individual techniques, every one of them is worthy of spending considerable dedicated time exploring and becoming familiar, if you like, at a very deep level. We can also recognize, following from the quote earlier, the sutra quote, that we can recognize that our words are empty, our prayers are empty, our offering is empty, and the objects of offering are empty. And in this way, our practice of offering becomes not only vast, because it's including these immeasurable things, but it's also profound, because it's in tune with our awareness of the nature of reality. And these sorts of practices can be explored by us in retreat. And so there are nundro, sort of preliminary practices where we'll do 100,000 refuge offerings to prepare and to soften our mind in order to do maybe a 3-year tantric retreat. And so these are really precious techniques indeed. So how are we to actually prostrate with our bodies? Returning to that. Shantideva presents this in verse 24. He says, with bodies as numerous as all the atoms within the universe, I prostrate to all the Buddhas of the 3 times, the Dharma community, and the Dharma and the Supreme community. So there are various advices that can be given here, but I'm only going to touch upon a few that I feel are the most salient. Clearly, as the verse indicates, we're prostrating to all the Buddhas of the 3 times. This means the Buddhas from the past, the Buddhas of the present, and the Buddhas who will come to be. In other words, this is all inclusive. And we're to think about those who have come in the past as infinite, all those in the present as infinite, and all those who will come to our presence, if you like, as Buddhas, as infinite. So we keep this very, very open, because the greater our field of merit, the greater the merit that we can generate in relationship to it. This is the essential relationship, the equation here. That's why so much emphasis is being placed on scale. It's not because Buddhists are grandiose and kind of interested in exaggerating volumes and numbers. It's because by stretching the mind, dilating it in this way, we begin to really savor what it means to have these very open states of compassionate, enlightened awareness. So thirdly, we prostrate with as many bodies as there are atoms within the universe. And so we actually have to visualize this when we're prostrating. So we don't just think one body is prostrating, but we visualize all our bodies, past, present, and future, if you like. We can visualize them in human form, otherwise it can be a little bit distracting, and then feel that we're all prostrating. Again, we're the kind of lead prostrator. We're prostrating on all the halves of these other selves. And this kind of thought came to me very strongly on one occasion when something very pleasant had happened to me. And I mentioned it to Geshe Doga, and his response took me back. It was a wonderful response. He said, you must thank your past person. Quite remarkable thing to say. It was only due to an action of my past person that I was able to perform this prostration, or am able to perform this prostration now. So in exactly the same way, by performing this prostration now, I'm working for future persons, not just myself, but all other beings. So you can see here, these things of ways of visualizing are very, very potent indeed. Thirdly, we prostrate to the Dharma, which includes both scriptural and realizational Dharma. So these become quite big topics, but to boil it down, scriptural Dharma refers to the recorded words of the Buddha included in the three baskets, whereas realizational Dharma refers to the practices arising from them, from their application, if you like, such as the three higher trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom, and so forth. We can also, at this point, talk about a conventional Dharma jewel, referring to the various limbs of the Buddha's teachings. And we can also refer to the ultimate Dharma jewel. And this is referring to the truth of the path and the truth of sensation. So I think we need to have a little bit more detail here. So technically speaking, the Dharma jewel is defined as, quote, a completely purified truth in the continuum of a superior being, which has any of the 8 qualities, such as being inconceivable, and so forth. So although this definition doesn't enumerate the 8 qualities, they are to be found in Maitreya's Uttara Tantra Shastra. A completely purified truth in the continuum of a superior being is another way of referring to a true cessation, which has 3 qualities, and these are 3 of the 8. It's inconceivable because it's beyond concepts. It's utterly peaceful since it is free from karma and disturbing emotions. And it's unfathomable because it's individually realized. I can fathom it, or one can, not me personally, but one can fathom it for oneself, but it's unfathomable otherwise. So what we must take from this is that it's actually the Dharma jewel that protects us. More specifically, it is the ultimate Dharma jewel, as indicated by the Buddha's statement, one frequently quoted by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I quote, "The sage does not wash away sins with water, nor wipe away the pains of beings with his hands. His realization he does not transfer to others. He frees by showing them the peace of ultimate reality." So have we really taken this on board? So many of us, I think, mistake propitiation, sort of calling upon the refuge objects, if you like, as a mechanism to make blessings pour in simply by making a request. In other words, we regard ourselves as an expectant, passive vessel, and the Buddhas are then to go about their marvelous work, filling us up with blessings. So in this sort of scenario, all the energy is coming from the Buddha's side. We simply wait to feel or experience the effects. We are considering ourselves to be the potentially ecstatic recipients with nothing to do other than to enjoy, if only. Because the situation is actually much, much more complex. In his Bodhisattva commentary, Gendoga said, "Sometimes we have a grand notion of what a blessing should be. But the shift of the mind from agitation to a more positive state, a more peaceful state, is the actual blessing. Indeed, this is the literal meaning of the Tibetan word for blessing, chinlap. Composed of 2 syllables, each with its own meaning, chin has a connotation of bestowing, as in giving, whereas lup has the meaning of magical or glorious. Thus, chinlap refers to giving or bestowing a glorious or clearer state of mind, and it is this experience of a clear and peaceful state of mind that is the sign of the occurrence of the actual Dharma blessing of an enlightened being." End of quote. So understanding a blessing in this dynamic psychological way is most useful, because we do often wonder what receiving a blessing might mean. How can we define it? In fact, as Geshe Doga has indicated in this quote, it refers to our experience of a transformation from a negative to a positive state of mind. This might seem like an overly wide account, an overly broad account, but it actually bears great import, because we're relating this to our refuge practice. So if we view a blessing in this transformative way, we gain a profound appreciation of what constitutes a blessing, not just in general terms, but in terms of our immediate lived experience. Consequently, we appreciate that while doing our practices, there's no point in just letting our mind continue in its usual distracted state. Allowing our mind to remain chaotic means our practice will remain dry and nothing good will come of it. Therefore, the actual blessing is the experience of a beneficial transformation within our mind. It occurs internally. From this perspective, this is quite something. From this perspective, we can say that every moment of the arising of a virtuous mind is a form of blessing and a sign that we are open to the flow of inspiration that is being continuously issued by the Buddhas and the holy beings. So it's not just the case that the Buddhas and holy beings only get around to blessing us when we bother to make a request. And they don't only bless us by sort of touching us with a miraculous beam of light on our forehead in some sort of spectacular fashion. It's absolutely crucial, instead, that we create the conditions, the softening of our mind from our own side, so that we're then able to be responsive and equipped to experience the flow of energy from the enlightened beings that will actually transform our own minds. So there's a kind of balance here. We have to bring something from our side, and the Buddhas are continuously bringing something from their side, but normally we're blocked off. We've ruled ourselves out. We've created barriers. And the afflictions, of course, are major barriers that block us from receiving this transformative effect of the blessings of the Buddhas. So we must establish conducive conditions so that we can actually vividly experience the touch of the Buddhas, as it were, from deep within our own consciousness, and seeking to open ourselves out to pure ethics is the absolutely ideal way of doing this. Perhaps then Buddhism can be considered differently to some other religious traditions where cosmic might and power is exerted from a divine being operating over and beyond us. We are its subjects, in other words. So Buddhism is painting a very different picture to this. So we really need to think about the implications. So Gen Doga indicates, following Gyaltsabje, that given our context, we must add something to that definition of the Dharma jewel, because it's referring to the Mahayana truth of cessation and the Mahayana truth of the path. Together, they indicate the scriptural Dharma that has been successfully extracted and directly applied in terms of our realizational experience, in dependence upon our progressive traversal of the Bodhisattva grounds and paths. And so these unique true cessations, if you like, are dependent on true paths which are unique to Bodhisattvas. So we're not saying that we can't have true cessations other than that, but there are some true cessations which we can only achieve on the momentum, the immense momentum of the Bodhisattva path. In other words, we can only attain these true cessations in dependence on true paths. And there are certain true cessations that are uniquely achieved in dependence on the Mahayana path and not otherwise. But before we look into that in a little bit more detail, we need to examine what is meant by a true cessation. A true cessation is nothing other than the permanent elimination of some portion of either an emotional obscuration or a cognitive obscuration from our mental continuum. So I'll read that again. A true cessation is nothing other than the permanent elimination of some portion of either an emotional obscuration or a cognitive obscuration from our mental continuum. So in general, such eliminations or stoppages, if you like, are only achieved in dependence upon the non-conceptual direct cognition of emptiness, and thus pertain to Arya beings on their respective vehicles. According to Prasangika, there is another sense in which you can understand a true cessation. It is a purified ultimate nature of the mind that has removed that level of afflictions. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama really brings this home in terms of what this means in terms of practice. His Holiness says, true cessation is attained not by wishing or praying for it. That's getting back to our misguided notion of blessing, isn't it? But by means of training the mind. The principal true path that trains the mind is the right view, the wisdom realizing emptiness, selflessness. We must put energy into understanding the four truths, first intellectually, then experientially, and then finally with penetrative wisdom. End of quote. So here, our particular emphasis as aspiring bodhisattvas is on the manner of practicing as does a Mahayana Arya being, because they are the ones who are going to go on to defeat not just the emotional obscurations, as do Hira and solitary realizer arhats, but the cognitive obscurations also, as these are what block us from full enlightenment and therefore must be overcome on the pure Bodhisattva grounds, referring to the last 3 of the 10 Bodhisattva grounds. Without traversing these 3 pure Bodhisattva grounds, the goal of becoming a Buddha will remain elusive. According to Prasangika, true cessations can also refer to, in the sense of necessarily including, the ultimate removal of those habits preventing one from full awakening. So this refers to the obscurations to all knowables, all knowing. These include habits of unawareness and grasping concerning persons, habits of disturbing emotions, and unawareness and grasping concerning all phenomena. So there are many subtle points to be made here, but time does not allow further investigation, except to say that an unawareness in this context refers to the factor on a mental continuum that prevents that continuum from cognizing manifestly and explicitly the 2 truths about any phenomena simultaneously. This is a unique quality of the Buddha. So Alex Berzin says, this factor is not a way of cognizing anything, but rather is a non-congruent affecting variable. Therefore, it is only called an unawareness, but it is not actually an unawareness, because an unawareness is a way of cognizing something. So this gets, again, quite technical, but it's really saying that a true cessation is a non-associated compositional factor. It's neither a mind nor a form. So we can go into a lot of detail there, but we won't. I'm just broadcasting some very, very important themes. In other words, it is an unawareness in this context of an obstruction. In other words, an unawareness in this context of an obstruction to omniscience can be referred to itself as a non-associated compositional factor. So there are 4 attributes of a true cessation, and these can be presented in terms of the 4 truths, and particularly the 3rd, the truth of the cessation of suffering, which is none other than nirvana, which means an extinguished state. So His Holiness and Thupten Chodron capture these meanings very, very vividly. And so I'll recommend strongly Samsara Nirvana and Buddha Nature as an incredibly readable and incredibly informative account of these very, very subtle points. As Berzin points out, the Tibetan word for nirvana can also carry a different connotation from being just an extinguished state. It can mean literally a state beyond sorrow, referring to a state of release from sorrow. Anyway, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Thupten Chodron capture both connotations in this quote. Nirvana is a state beyond sorrow, sorrow referring to samsara, its dukkha, its sort of problems, and its their origins. Alternatively, sorrow alludes to inherent existence, and nirvana, beyond sorrow, indicates that it is the emptiness of inherent existence. So on that basis, His Holiness now presents 4 attributes of nirvana. And these are very, very valuable to think about. Nirvana is a cessation, this is the first point, of dukkha. Dukkha is kept in Sanskrit here in many new translations because it's impossible to capture it in English in one word. It's not just suffering, it's dissatisfactionness, but it's more than just dissatisfactionness, it's a real problem, dissatisfactionness, sort of fullness. And so it's kind of all the problems that unfurl in samsara are dukkha. So nirvana is a state in which the origins of dukkha have been abandoned, and it thus ensures that dukkha will not again arise. And so if we're looking at true cessation while on the path, the achievement of a true cessation means that there'll be a certain portion of the removal of suffering such that that particular kind of suffering cannot get up and running ever again because it's been eliminated from the very base. Second quality is that nirvana is peace, because it is a separation in which afflictions have been eliminated. So this peace is a separation from the afflictions. And so it's peaceful by nature because it's the afflictions that cause the trouble. Nirvana, third point, is magnificence because it's the superlative source of benefit and bliss. There is nothing higher, if you like. And nirvana is also freedom and definite emergence because it is total, irreversible release from samsara. So to bring all this back to a practical level, His Holiness says in relation to the second attribute, which is that nirvana is peace because it's a separation from which the afflictions have been eliminated. His Holiness says, not understanding that nirvana is ultimate peace, people do not try to attain it and are satisfied with a temporary, superior samsaric state. So this superior samsaric state is very special in its meaning. It's saying that we're going for the pinnacle of states of desirability or pleasure, but only within a samsaric framework. This attribute of seeking in this limited way, His Holiness says, counteracts the belief that states polluted by ignorance are nirvana. In other words, we're still questing to find states of samsara as nirvana. Somehow we're going to turn them into nirvana just by dint of effort. But this isn't what's been intended here at all. This peace arises by separating ourselves from the afflictions and their causes. This is the actual peace that we're striving for. It has nothing to do with samsara in that sense at all. So people, His Holiness says, who are convinced of the harm of the afflictions and the harm of karma know that their cessation is a state of peace and joy. that will not vanish. So this is absolutely critical to recognize. We're looking at a peace and a joy that cannot deteriorate, cannot be lost, can't be mitigated or kind of disheveled by anything that we would meet. So by understanding, and one could argue now only by understanding the qualities of nirvana in this sense, which are also the qualities of true cessation, do we become dissatisfied with the temporary samsaric superior states, referring to rebirth, particularly in the upper realms of samsara, human and above, and instead we seek to move beyond that. Moreover, and this is the crunch for us, moreover, from a Mahayana perspective, and in the immediate terms of our practice, we thereby turn this renunciation around to consider the plight of others, not just ourselves. This renunciation becomes for us a source of intense great compassion, together with an engaged resolve to embark on the Mahayana path, because we recognize now that solitary peace, even our own solitary peace, will not touch the suffering plight of countless mothers. In other words, by understanding that the only way of effectively rescuing them is to become a fully enlightened Buddha ourselves, we resolve to overcome the obscurations to omniscience on top of removing the obscurations to solitary peace. Because it's these obscurations to omniscience which are blocking us from the fruit of Buddhahood. In the words of His Holiness, the highest type of nirvana occurs at the level of Buddhahood. So we've got to kind of, when we use the word nirvana, we have to describe what context we're using. The highest type of nirvana occurs at the level of Buddhahood. It is called a non-abiding nirvana because one is not abiding either in the extreme of cyclic existence or in the extreme of solitary peace. Rather, one has brought to perfection one's own development as well as the capacity to affect the welfare of others. His Holiness continues, one not only has completely overcome the afflictive obscurations or obstructions to liberation from cyclic existence, but has also utterly overcome, has to utterly overcome the obscurations or obstructions to omniscience. So we must understand and in practice terms observe the necessary sequence of the removal of the two sets of obscurations here. First, those preventing liberation, and secondly, those preventing full enlightenment. His Holiness indicates, and this is according to the Prasangika tenet system, until one has utterly removed all the afflictive obscurations, one cannot begin to remove the obstructions to omniscience. Since this is the case, a practitioner cannot begin to overcome the obscurations to omniscience on any of the first 7 Bodhisattva grounds, which are called impure, because one still has afflictive obstructions that are remaining to be abandoned. Rather, one begins abandoning the obstructions to omniscience on the 8th Bodhisattva ground and continues to do so on the 9th and 10th. These being called the 3 pure grounds because the afflictive obstructions have been abandoned, end of quote. His Holiness also says, the obstructions to liberation from cyclic existence cause suffering for persons who have them in their continuum. And the obstructions to omniscience, since they prevent one from knowing all objects of knowledge cause one to be unable to understand the constitutions, the thoughts, the interests, and the predispositions of trainees, and thereby prevent one from bringing about the welfare of others on a vast scale. Therefore, when one overcomes the afflictive obstructions, one is liberated from cyclic existence. But when, in addition, one overcomes the obstructions to all that is knowable, one gains the state of omniscience. So we can understand the dispositions, the karmic potential, and so forth, even down to the most subtle level. So there's a very, very famous analogy that's given to present this relationship of the order of removing the obscurations. And it's the analogy of garlic in a vessel. I don't know if any of us are cooks here. I cook with garlic a lot. And I know it can carry on your fingers for some considerable time, even after you've had washed several loads of dishes and so forth. So this is very pertinent to the way the story works. Regarding this subtle point, regarding the impossibility of beginning to generate the actual antidote to the obstructions to omniscience without having first abandoned the afflictive obstructions, His Holiness the Dalai Lama quotes Guntang Gunchuk Dempe Drome's famous account of putting garlic into a vessel. Quote, "If you put garlic into a vessel, it deposits some of its odor in the vessel itself. Thus, when you seek to clean the vessel, it is necessary first to remove the garlic. Similarly, a consciousness conceiving inherent existence, like garlic, deposits predispositions in the mind that produce the appearance of inherent existence. Thus, there is no way to cleanse the mind of these predispositions, which are like the flavour of garlic left in the vessel of the mind, until one removes all consciousnesses conceiving inherent existence from the mind. First, the garlic must be removed, then its odour can be removed." So what we're to really appreciate here is that when the final adventitious habits are removed from our mental continuums, we are Buddhas. So I've qualified that, the final adventitious, because none of these obstructions are other than adventitious. They can only dwell for as long as the causes for their dwelling are intact. And this is precisely the point where we chop them off at the base and they're ceased. So His Holiness says, from beginningless time, the basic nature of the mind has been immaculate and has never mixed with stains or afflictions. As we progress on the path, the transforming Buddha nature develops. The mind becomes purer and the obscurations are gradually eliminated. When all obscurations have been removed, such that they can never return, the purified mind becomes the wisdom Dharmakaya, and its emptiness becomes the nature Dharmakaya. End of quote. So it's this purified nature that is the wisdom Dharmakaya, together with its own ultimate nature, its own lack of inherent existence, to which we prostrate. I think I've lost my way here. I've come right back to it here. We're prostrating to this entire system of the removal of the obscurations and obstructions from their very base, together with their purpose. And this is why we're prostrating to the Buddhas, the Dharma, and to the Sangha. So Indeed, it's the all-pervasive Dharmakaya from which the other kayas spontaneously spring that we ourselves are seeking to achieve. You can see that even from this all too brief presentation, that the emphasis on prostrating to the enlightened beings should not be interpreted or misinterpreted as somehow paying external homage to an external object, albeit a miraculously wonderful one. Rather, as we have already emphasized, we are prostrating also to our own internal Buddha potential that we intend to realize, because we also recognize by the same exact gesture that all other suffering beings like ourselves have this same potential, this same Buddha nature, this same Buddha nature that is the substantial cause for enlightenment, as His Holiness puts it. So Buddha nature is the substantial cause for enlightenment dwelling within each and every sentient being without exception. And so this is the source of our Mahayana refuge and the reason why we must travel the Bodhisattva path to full enlightenment, to help others actualize this. And we can't do that without actualizing it ourselves first. So returning now to the last line of the refuge verse, in verse 24, we also prostrate with innumerable bodies to the Supreme Community. And the Supreme Community here is referring to the Sangha, and it particularly refers to the Mahayana Arya Sangha, and we can now appreciate why that is. And I think it's very helpful here to consider Draupa Geltsen's description of the Sangha in relation to this verse as accomplishers. They help us accomplish. He says, the Dharma is what is to be accomplished, and the Buddha is a result of accomplishing the Dharma. So it goes without saying that it's very meaningful to prostrate to the Buddha and the Dharma, but we must also rely upon the Sangha, because they are composed of the noble bodhisattvas on the Mahayana grounds of realization, from which there is no regression. Maitreya has said in the Uttara Tantra Shastra, and I quote, their knowledge of the nature and the multiplicity of things and their inward primal wisdom is unstained. And so the Sangha of the wise will never regress, has qualities that cannot be surpassed. End of quote. So by taking refuge in these Sangha and prostrating to them, and at the same time viewing them as our intimate, close, entirely trustworthy companions, because they never slip up or slip back, we're enabled to undertake intense purification and also to accumulate vast stores of merit, as only then does our practice gain any real momentum. I think there's another reason why for holding the Sangha in as a sort of source of deep trustworthiness. We should consider, says Kunzang Pelden, that holding the Sangha in the following way: all our teachers, attendants and students are the very jewel of Sangha, and we should keep company with them, respecting them in thought, word and deed, without irritating them even for an instant. It is written in the Mahaberi Sutra, quote, Ananda, do not sorrow. Nanda, do not weep. In future, I will come again, appearing as your spiritual friend, to act for your and others' sake. So in other words, we see the Sangha here as the actual manifestations of the Buddha in a palpable form, such as our own precious teachers, who can communicate with us in a way that we can comprehend, and we can also respond in a meaningful way. And so there's a kind of meeting here, which is possible because the Buddhas are manifesting in a form that's approachable and palpable, even at our current level of karmic obscuration. So let's summarize the benefits of going for refuge, because this is what all this has been about. By way of summary, Dragpa Geltsen quotes Dorje Zimpa Contra Geltsen. Due to going for refuge, you will be included amongst Buddhists. You will become a support for generating all vows. All negative actions accumulated in the past will be restrained and exhausted. The merit of going for refuge cannot be fathomed by mind. You will not fall into the lower realms and will not be harmed by human and non-human obstacles. Whatever you think will be accomplished, and you'll quickly attain enlightenment. Contemplating these 8 benefits, go for refuge 3 times, each in the morning and at night. So, for further elaboration, I recommend that we do refer to the classic Lam Rim presentations of refuge. And likewise, when discussing verse 24, many of the oral commentaries on Shantideva's texts, which we find in our Google folder, present incredibly detailed accounts of the common precepts of refuge. This is because they are important to know, as they are the foundation, as Kung Sang Pelden has indicated, of taking other vows, such as Bodhisattva vows or those of a renunciate or tantric vows. So, in short, they guarantee that we have secured a doorway to virtuous practice. So just to quickly run through the refuge precepts. Once you've taken refuge in the Buddha, we should no longer take refuge, permanent refuge, in the worldly gods, nor pay homage to them. Once we've taken refuge in the Dharma, we should do no harm to any living being, even in our dreams, but protect them as much as they can. So isn't this incredible? This is one of the precepts of taking the refuge vow, which is the beginning of our Buddhist practice, is this promise not to harm another sentient being and to benefit them as much as we can. Already, we're committed to pure ethical practice. Once we've taken refuge in the Sangha, we no longer associate with those who hold extreme views, nor with those who criticize our teacher and the teachings and have no faith in them. And we consider all likenesses of the Buddha, even a fragment of a clay image or a satsar, as representative of the enlightened mind, as the jewel of Buddha, and we should rid ourselves of any kind of disrespect towards them. So this came up recently. Someone rang me and said, I've got some broken Buddha statues. What do I do with them? And to put them in the bin would be a violation of our refuge precepts. I said, you build a shrine house in a tree in a safe place that has a roof and sort of gates or doors that can be closed securely, and you treat them as complete objects of veneration. So this is the way we carry out our refuge precepts in practice. Likewise, we should never put our Buddhist texts on the ground And I got told off one day in front of Lama Zopa. It wasn't the first time I've been told off. It was one of those large public teachings, and we had our little meditation tables in front of us. And I had one of my Dharma, I think it was my FPMT retreat prayer book on the table. And then because I was focusing, well, the excuse I'm going to give, I was focusing so much on the teaching, I put my iPad on top of the book. And Rinpoche stopped and said, off. You don't put anything on the Dharma. So in my mind, because I'm reluctant to yield a point, I thought to myself, is an iPad that's carrying sacred Buddhist scriptures in PDF form not another manifestation of the Dharma, and therefore I'm not actually putting something on top? But that didn't work for Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He said that the very thought that we would do that is a lack of respect for the Dharma. And so Lama Zopa Rinpoche will even pick up bits of yellow and red cloth, the colour, maroon cloth, the colour of the robes from the ground, and put them in a high place as a means of respecting the Sangha, because that colour and that cloth, that material, is associated to those holy beings. This is how sensitive we can be. So we should also consider any symbol of the monastic order, such as a colour, the yellow belt of renunciate, or a patch of yellow or red cloth, as the jewel of the Sangha, and treat it with respect. So that's a very quick account, but it gives you an idea of the kind of commitment that we're making when we go for refuge and the scale of that. Even further, is it even imaginable to go further? The expanse of the scope of our refuge practice when we prostrate is, as verse 24 indicates, with bodies as numerous as all the atoms within the universe. So this is the same exponential instruction that we had earlier regarding Samantabhadra offerings. However, Geshe Doga, in his commentary, tells us a variation we can introduce here, which is sourced from the close oral lineage, and hence it's to be considered as very, very special. Doga says, here it is relevant to present the unique instruction that has been passed down from the earlier masters, which is that when one does the prostration, one visualizes manifesting one's body over the infinite lifetimes of the past. Thus, one imagines each and every life that one has taken in the past in a human aspect, rather than in whatever form it might have been. Thus, one is surrounding oneself with an infinite number of manifestations of oneself in human form. So, in terms of my own practice, which is very clumsy, I attempt to do this visualization sincerely when I do my prostration practices to the 35 Buddhas of Confession, because this means that I'm not just confining my purification scope to the non-virtues that I've executed or committed in this lifetime. There's certainly enough of those to spend time purifying, but I'm also utilizing the opportunity of my present life to purify on behalf of all my own past selves. This is really very deep to consider. And it's actually the same meaning as Geshe Doga intended when he said to me, when something good happened, thank your own kind past person. When something bad happens to you, thank your own past bad person, because that's the reason why you're experiencing trouble now. And so on their behalf, you don't push them away and dismiss them and say, go to the rubbish bin, you're worthless because you're misguided. You perform the prostrations on their behalf. And as you're rising up from your prostration, you visualize that you're drawing all of our past selves, existences from the lower realms into the upper realms and so forth. So of course you can also embrace doing that on behalf of others, but it's a matter of, becoming familiar with the whole array of those visualization techniques so we can apply them according to the need of the moment, if you like. So reaching back in time and prostrating on behalf of our own past persons who performed particular non-virtuous deeds at particular times means that we can be left in no doubt that we are indeed reaching back to exhaustively purify our past negative actions, even or especially the ones we don't or couldn't recognize at the time of performing them as negative. So Geshe Doga says, it is said that the uniqueness of this practice is that even doing just one prostration in this way purifies heavy negative karmas one has created over beginningless lives in the past. So we purify an incredible amount of negative karma because of our intention and our visualization. Likewise, because one is prostrating to an infinite number of enlightened beings at the same time, one accumulates an infinite amount of merit at the same time. So this is an incredibly powerful way to do the practice of prostration. So, end of quote. There are various details to do with the physical nature of a prostration, such as 5 points of contact of the body corresponding to eliminating 5 delusions and so forth. We can make contact with the crown of the head, the throat, the heart. And we also contact the earth in 5 places with the right knee, the right hand, the left hand, and the forehead. And I'm not going to go into the significance of those details, but I recommend that you refer to some of the larger Lamrim texts. For example, Pabonka Rinpoche covers many of these details in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand on pages 172 to 175, just in regards to the nature of the physical prostrations, contact with the ground. How amazing is that? There it is in detail. Kunzang Pelden, in his Nectar of Manjushri speech, gives a very complex account, including details of the 5 points, as well as the need to maintain the subtle channels of the body in a straight manner on pages 180 to 181. I haven't got my dust jacket here, but in order that our energy winds and the subtle channels are conducive to the flow of our mind without obstruction. So a physical prostration, Gelt Sabje places the next several root verses of Shantideva's text under the subheading of physical prostration, but by identifying 3 kinds, or 3 aspects, if you like. There's the physical prostration to the triple gem, the physical prostration to the bases for generating bodhicitta, and the physical prostration to the abbots, the preceptors, and so forth. So this threefold distinction describes the sequence that we find in the very next verse of Shantideva's text. I quote, 25, likewise, I prostrate to all the reliquaries, to the bases of the awakening mind, to all learned abbots and masters, and to all the noble practitioners. So let's just have a quick breakdown. Regarding the first line, likewise, I prostrate to all the reliquaries. We must be aware that these represent the holy, omniscient mind of a Buddha. In Padmasambhava's instructions on offerings to stupas, King Trisong Detsen requested, quote, "Hey, great master, what are the benefits of prostrating to, circumambulating, making offerings, offering service, and so forth to the great stupa, which in nature embodies all the Buddhas of the 3 times? The great guru, referring to Padmasambhava, then granted this instruction: listen, great king, generate intense devotion. Since all the 3 times Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have actually absorbed into the holy object of the mind and are abiding within it, any request or prayer done to this great stupa will spontaneously and effortlessly succeed, for it is like a precious wish-granting jewel. The benefits received by any transmigratory being with a pure special attitude who does prostration or circumambulation or makes offerings are incalculable and cannot be expressed even by all the past, present, and future Buddhas. I will express, says Padmasambhava, some of the benefits for sentient beings to generate happiness. This holy object of the mind of all the 3 times Buddhas is a field of offering of all transmigratory beings, including the Devas. Whatever requests and prayers are made to be accomplished without effort, it grants each and every single sublime and common realization. For example, this great stupa, like a precious wish-fulfilling jewel, is called liberating by seeing, hearing, and remembering. Anyone who sees the stupa with their eyes closes the door of rebirth in the lower realms. Anyone who hears about the stupa with their ears leaves the seed of supreme enlightenment. Anyone who remembers the stupa is saved from the harms of craziness and paralysis and generates a special concentration in their mental continuum. All of those who put their palms together to a stupa will abide in the perfect path. So this is a very short text that Kabje Zopa Rinpoche recommends that students take with them when they go on pilgrimage to the great stupas and the great gompas, so that we really can practice with a great fervour in those special places and those special times. So Geshe Tekchok, in his commentary on this verse, expands the meaning of sutra to include the abode, quote, the abodes of the bodhisattvas on the path of meditation, which are places where they have meditated on bodhicitta, the holy places where Buddha was born, enlightened, turned the wheel of Dharma and died, and also objects to be prostrated to. They are chertan, usually translated as stupa, chorten, usually translated as stupa, but literally bases of offering. It is certainly valuable to think this way, end of quote. So these are certainly valuable points to consider, especially when we're planning to retreat. For example, if we can retreat in a place where blessed ones have already retreated, it's said that we receive the benefits of that place in the form of blessings again. So I just want to mention here, there's a sort of slightly funny story. When His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to Melbourne, Australia, where I live, in 1982, the conditions for the receipt of the kind of reception for Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism in Australia was still quite new. And there wasn't a large sort of organisational basis to support the tour. And so George Farley, one of our Tara Institute students, very kindly offered his 2-story Victorian mansion in Carlton as the residence for His Holiness during his stay in Melbourne. How wonderful is that? But the interesting part of this story is only emerged years later, when one of the Tibetan refugees in Melbourne was making inquiries about where His Holiness had stayed during his first tour. in 1982. And it was mentioned that he had stayed at George Farley's house. And they said, well, can I go and see the shrine room? And only to be told that the house had been resold on realestate.com or whatever it was in those days, and had been converted into a block of units. The Tibetan was shocked because from a Tibetan perspective, any place where His Holiness has sat and dwelt is a holy place to be respected and preserved. So I'm not saying that to criticize George Farley, of course that'd be inappropriate. It's just to do with our possible lack of awareness, how extraordinary it is that a holy being might step into our place, and each of those step places becomes sacred accordingly. It's a really beautiful way of thinking, isn't it, about the significance about our teachers. So the second line, to the bases of an awakening mind, might appear to refer to bodhisattvas as they are the bearers of the awakening mind. However, Gyaltsab Sabje, in his commentary on this verse, goes one layer deeper, and he says, quote, the basis of bodhicitta refers to the causes from which that mind is generated. Geshe Doga similarly comments, there is a Tibetan term, nam, in this verse, which indicates numerous, and this refers to the numerous causes of bodhicitta. So we're prostrating to these causes of bodhicitta. This is how precious bodhicitta is. Even its causes are worthy of absolute veneration because they're the incipient conditions for the actualization of this precious awakening mind. So as we saw with Chandrakirti's homage to great compassion, which I quoted a few weeks back, there is indeed an immense sense in our prostration to the causes of bodhicitta, as they are the seeds from which bodhicitta springs. And the causes must be created prior to the mind itself. So by praising the causes here, we're implicitly praising the fruit or the outcome, which is the flowering mind of bodhicitta itself, which is also going to be the Buddha. So all that's wrapped up in paying homage to the causes. So we can now appreciate, in other words, that the bases extend beyond that of our own immediate mind generation to incorporate its prerequisites, our own causes for bodhicitta. So again, in prostrating to the bases of bodhicitta, we are prostrating towards this entire network of causes and conditions which enable this mind to flourish. So in the last part of the verse, there's reference to all the learned abbots and masters. And this follows from the above, as they are the living representatives of the Buddha. Geshe Doga specifies, however, that the reference in this line is particularly to those abbots and acharyas who function in giving us vows. This highlights the immense value of receiving vows and the enormous respect that one holds for one's preceptor. This is because in conferring the vows, they provide us with the route of obtaining liberation and enlightenment. Geshe Tekchok succinctly explains, I quote, the noble practitioners are those who are exerting themselves in the path to liberation and omniscient mind, who want to attain these states, and who in this way are abiding in the disciplines of these. They are well behaved and want to attain liberation and omniscient mind. These people could be bodhisattvas or they could be ordinary beings, but they are always calm and subdued. So we now arrive at the next section, verse 26. And has been ushered in by our earlier discussion. You can see here that the explanation is moving quite slowly because of the incredible amplification that's been given around the intent of these several verses on prostration and refuge. 26 reads, I seek refuge in all the Buddhas until I possess the essence of awakening. Likewise, I seek refuge in Dharma and in the assembly of Bodhisattvas. So here in this verse, the emphasis has shifted slightly in that it is now focusing on our seeking refuge. This is a form of yearning coming from our heart, founded upon our resolute conviction, which has already been established, that the refuge objects to which we've been prostrating are absolutely our source of safety, or what Berzin calls rather charmingly, our source of safe direction. We're pointing in the right direction at last. This might seem like familiar territory, but executing such a cursory reading of this verse is to entirely miss the crucial point, which is that we are now ready, and only now are ready, to make a series of heartfelt requests towards the refuge objects as our chosen objects. In other words, we are required to undertake refuge via our making of a resolute and deeply informed pledge. This word pledge is crucial here. We are seeking to cement our commitment by going to refuge in the form of a pledge to adhere unshakably to those refuge objects in all of our moments of behavior from now on. So every time, each and every time we go for refuge, we are repeating and reinforcing this foundational pledge, and thereby reinforcing it so that it is unshakable going forth. In fact, it will be so unshakable that in our next, hopefully, our next rebirth and the rebirth after that, we will have an instinctive inclination to seek out the triple gem refuge objects and immediately throw ourselves into committed practice in relation with them, because we have already generated that pledge, which is now ripening karmically in our future lives. This is really an incredibly valuable thing to think about, because it secures the foundation of the security of continuity of our practice, without which we couldn't possibly incrementally develop our spiritual potential and qualities. So this is why it's said that we guard this pledge even at the cost of our lives. It's rather touching to think here that when some of the Tibetan refugees were fleeing their home, they were often carrying ritual relic objects and ritual objects and small shrine houses on leather straps and so forth with images of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And so His Holiness, at one of the teachings many years ago, addressed the Tibetans who were refugees who had managed to attend those teachings, often at great peril and at great risk for their families back at home. And he said that if in the course of their travels they were asked by the army, Chinese army, to surrender any images of His Holiness, they were to do so to save their lives, and He gave them permission to do that. Isn't that remarkable, how kind His Holiness is? What he was actually saying was that under these conditions, normally one would guard that shrine with my life, even involved losing it. But because of the extreme conditions, I bless you to strategically act out the giving up of it, because I know that in your heart, you're not relinquishing your refuge objects at all. So you can see here how the tenderness of His Holiness appraisal of their very difficult situation. So Geshe Topton, in his commentary on verse 26, says, we address the Buddhas of the 10 direction, disclosing our concern. This disclosure, which in many places is very confronting, is because our deeds are often found to be shabby and mean. So Shantideva is now going to unfold the shabbiness and meanness of our habitual behaviour, and do that in the form of asking us to make this open disclosure in front of the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. We've arrived at this point for the first time in countless lifetimes, where we've actually got all the ingredients to undergo this absolutely amazingly direct purification process. And so this is now what Shantideva is zeroing in upon with great, great precision and force. So, in short, the Triple Gem is being called upon to witness our laying out with excruciating detail the myriad evil deeds I have done or ordered to be done by others over countless lifetimes, and which, if I do not really take refuge and attempt to radically change my ways, I shall continue to compulsively perform, leaving behind a miserable trail of damage to both myself and to others as I presumably go about my merry way. This has been my wont in the past. I've performed all sorts of dastardly deeds, and yeah. When I was, I won't go into detail, but a few years ago, I was bashed brutally in the street. It was a homosexual hate crime, and the police were involved, and I had to do an ID photo portrait thing. So I went through all that because I thought this person is a danger to others. So I'll go there. But after this very difficult and in many ways confronting process of building up a photo ID from memory of a moment of trauma, I asked the policeman what this person would have done after bashing me. And much to my amazement, he said he would have gone home, gone to the fridge, got a beer, flipped the lid, and turned on his favourite TV program, which totally floored me. How amazing is that? We have been doing that since time immemorial. That's how little conscience or conscientiousness we have at our disposal to even begin to think about the impact of our actions. So I just cite that little story. So how far away would the Buddha ideal from the Buddha ideal would we then find ourselves if we continue to act in this destructive, thoughtless way, to even hear the word Buddha in our ear, with our ear will escape us. So in his commentary, Kunzang Pelden vividly and concisely catalogues a list of critical reasons why refuge, our taking of refuge, plays such an essential role in our confession practice. Indeed, it constitutes the very basis. He says, taking refuge opens the door to all the Buddhist teachings. It is the basis of all the vows and the source of all excellent qualities. It marks the difference between those who are inside the Dharma and those who are outside of it. And through it, one joins the ranks of ones who are within. Refuge is therefore of the greatest importance, for it is the entrance to the entire Dharma. In whichever kind of teaching one engages, one must first take refuge. It is the foundation of the vows. In fact, our teacher, the Buddha, did not allow the vows to be given to anyone who had not taken refuge, from the 8 precept Upavasa vow up to the pledges of secret mantra. It is only to those who had the refuge commitments that he allowed the other vows to be given. End of quote. So from our current perspective, this is vital to take on board, as without taking Bodhisattva vows on the basis of refuge vows, and these usually on the basis of other vows, such as lay vows or pratamoksha vows, we're unable to enter into engaging bodhicitta, as we've already described. How then, devoid of engaging bodhicitta, would we ever hope to step towards enlightenment? So Kunzang Pelden hammers this point home. He says, refuge is the source of all good qualities. For if someone without refuge were to undertake any of the paths, whether the path of individual liberation, the Bodhisattva path, or the path of secret mantra, no benefit would come of it. Let me repeat, no benefit would come of it. Why? Because the immense merit of the refuge objects facilitates the generation of immense benefits for those who prostrate to them. To highlight this, in the Rastrapala Sutra, which is again quoted by Shantideva in his training anthology, and I quote, "Those who have no religious commitment to the Buddha have no religious commitment to the Dharma and to the community. They have no commitment to vows and to training. With their minds full of vile actions, their faces turned towards the lower realms. Once they have fallen from the human realm at death by the power of karma, ignorant and bewildered, now in the hells, now among animals, now among hungry ghosts, they find suffering." Shantideva also quotes from the Heap of Jewels, "In those deep places where the intellect cannot penetrate, only the Tathagata has the eyes to see. The Tathagata alone knows. I do not know. The awakening of the Buddhas is without limit. Towards beings with their various degrees of religious commitment, the Dharma teachings of the Tathagata proceeds. When you have formed this thought, this pledge, don't throw it away." So in other words, to throw it away would to be again, to succumb again to the immense force of our unrestrained, demeritorious deeds. So Kunzang Pelden says, as Drikung Kopka Rinpoche has said, if you neglect refuge, the Dharma's foundation, there can be no benefit. And indeed, when there is no foundation, there can be neither wall nor wall painting. On the other hand, someone who now has the vows of refuge and practices on any of these 3 paths will gain all the qualities of the path in its result, which are like the walls and the paintings built on strong and sure foundations. I think it's a very beautiful image, isn't it? So I haven't lost the point here. I'm driving it back again. We must take from this that our disclosure, our divulging of our negative deeds is done from within our open-hearted embrace of refuge. For it alone promises us a path leading infallibly to the achievement of the highest enlightenment goals. So again, we are to recognize that what we're doing here in this confessional practice, which Shantideva is beginning to introduce, is preparing the ground to take Bodhisattva vows, which we'll find in the 3rd chapter. So at this point of his commentary in relation to this verse, Kunzang Pelden gives an incredibly elaborate presentation. He discusses the general principles of refuge, the causes of refuge, the essence of refuge, the different kinds of refuge, an explanation of provisional causal refuge, an explanation of ultimate resultant refuge, refuge according to the Bodhicharyavatara, our current text, an explanation of Hinayana refuge, an explanation of Mahayana refuge, the general way of taking refuge, and refuge precepts. Only then does he begin to give his account of the confession of negative actions, starting with verse 27. So I don't think I'm sort of building a whole lot of extra material in here that shouldn't be there. I'm just trying to give you some idea of how critical this point is in relation to our purification practice. And the order of procedure is highly significant. In other words, if we attempt to skip or gloss the meaning of refuge in our current confessional context, we would be incredibly foolishly short-sighted and would even render our attempts at disclosure as senseless. For example, in his account of the essence of refuge, the 3rd of his refuge topic divisions, Kunzang Pelden says, the essence of refuge is to acknowledge the 3 jewels, committing to them in order to be free of something that one holds in dread. To be free of something that one holds in dread. So here we're referring to samsaric suffering in general and to the lower realms in particular. Due to our awareness, this is the crunch, due to our awareness of the vast accumulation of evil deeds in our mental continuum, the imprints. In other words, it would be a dread composed of not being able to find happiness and not being able to avoid suffering. It would also be a dread arising from the prospect of our imminent tumbling into the lower realms, as that quote from the Rastrapala Sutra I made a little bit earlier make abundantly clear. So Kunzang Pelden stresses refuge should not be mistaken as a kind of request or prayer. It's a form of commitment, he says, and an acknowledgement. It is a commitment to the 3 jewels and a resolution to accept them as objects of refuge. It is a clear decision whether one is raised, a clear decision that henceforth, whatever happens, good or bad, in joy or sorrow, whether one is raised up or brought low, one's hope and trust are placed exclusively in the 3 jewels. It is crucial to understand that the essence of refuge is an acknowledgement and a commitment. So these are powerful words indeed, and certainly describe what it means to take refuge. So there are no halfway measures here. You're either fully in or fully out. We are either totally committed or we're still wavering. So if we seek the refuge objects to reach over and miraculously pluck us out of our pending plight of falling into the lower realms, for example, we are making a profound mistake. For what will rescue us from our karmic fate is not the Buddhas, but ourselves, in that it is we who have created boundless stores of evil deeds and it is likewise ourselves who must purify them. This is crucial. By placing our hope and trust exclusively in the three jewels, as Kunsang Pelden is so assertively advising, provides the basis for us to begin to do this. So I might stop there for the moment, I think. Yeah, it goes on quite a lot of materials being tossed out here. I'm really trying to get this sense of conviction and pledge. We're getting ready to disclose. And I do make the comment in my notes a little bit further on that if we were to disclose instead of a Buddha to a mass murderer, our own crimes of killing, they not only would they not have any impulse or capacity to absolve us from our negative deeds of killing, but they might even applaud and encourage us to kill better, more extensively, more effectively. So you can see here that the Buddha is the absolute contradictory equivalent of that monstrous example I just given, that even to contemplate the qualities of a Buddha throws our awareness of the nature and extent of our negative habits into such stark relief that we can begin to divulge them in the process of purification. And so this is very different from a kind of mournful self-pity, thinking, oh, aren't I a terrible person, how bad I am, just shocking, really. It's amazing anyone even bothers to talk to me. I'm such a helpless, pathetic, negative being. This is the kind of litany of self-cherishing going on here. It is the exact opposite of what we're doing in our confession practice, because what we're trying to do is to sweep away the impediments that are preventing us from successfully traveling on the Bodhisattva's path and engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds. And that is why Shantideva is so forcefully setting up the conditions for us to clear these negative deeds away in the next large set of verses. They go up to over 60 verses. There's a lot of verses coming up. I think 60 in all, but anyway. So are there any questions or reflections at that point? I think I've over-exhausted you, maybe. I don't mean to do that. Yeah, Stephen.
Hello, Ross.
Hi.
Thank you again for another lovely class. I'll just say this to help cool you down a little bit. It's minus 11 C here right now. So just think of that in your mind.
Isn't that incredible?
So it's just, this is really just kind of more of a really minor point, but earlier you mentioned you were talking about true cessations, and you define them as a permanent elimination of some portion of an emotional obscuration.
Yeah.
Are we just thinking of that word as just a synonym for an afflictive obscuration, or is there some other phrase?
No, just an alternative for an afflicted. Yeah.
Okay. And then there's another pair of words, reactive emotions. And so we can think of those as afflictions or what arises from the afflictions.
Yes, I think it's reactive emotions when we compound our afflictions based on our previous affliction.
Yeah, so we can think of the mental factors, the afflictive mental factors, the unwholesome mental factors, and then the superimpositions, elaborations, and so on. Are really the reactive emotions that are built on top of those.
Yes, that's right.
All right.
And the question from our side is that we don't make any of those distinctions. We just react.
Yeah.
We're a crude instrument, alas. And part of this confession process works backwards as a kind of forensic diagnostic, really, in that we become more acutely aware of the mind generation, negative mind generation, as it's getting up and running. Because we've been confessing it, the next time we get anger coming up, for example, it kind of hurts from the very beginning. It's a shock to the system to have that mind active. Normally we just fill up with anger and act. And even if later we regret the damage is done. But from a practitioner's point of view, as Shantideva is going to mention in his chapter on patience, we can develop techniques for stepping in earlier and earlier and earlier into the evolutionary, reactive, progressive, exaggerating stages of the rising of a powerful, afflicted mind. And the example of the straw, you put out a spark in a pile of straw quite easily with a single stomp of the foot, but it's very difficult to put out a blazing pile of hay. So it's skillful to step in earlier. So part of the purification process is actually purifying our mind, not just metaphysically or sort of symbolically, but we're actually purifying, as His Holiness is going to say. And also, I'm going to quote next week Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, who says that with purification, we thin our karma, our negative karmas. They become thinner and thinner and thinner. They become less able to operate. They're kind of still there, and they're kind of a residue, if you like, and they're still potentially operative, especially at the cruder levels of residue. But as we continue the purification process, we can actually get to a point where we can't give rise to the afflictions manifesting, even though we're still carrying the imprints or the habits, if you like, on our mind stream. And so therefore, it becomes possible to engage in even deeper, subtler levels of purification practice. So it's a bit like the garlic in the bowl example. So we start off with the crude ones, and we start off with the very crude ones, which involve restraining the three doors, body, speech, and mind, from the afflictive emotions from pouring out as dynamic forces of trouble. And then we start to look at the minds that generate that pouring out and working with that. And then we go even deeper into the causes of the gestation of those disturbing minds from their very root, which is going to involve analytical meditation and the generation of wisdom. So we also need to be accompanied by vast accumulations of merit. Even to have the wish to purify is already an incredibly meritorious state we must recognize. That's why I said we shouldn't be self-pitying here. It's very exciting to think that we are now wanting to purify. And so we're not comparing ourselves to anyone else, thinking that I'm got more to purify than you or whatever, because that would just sort of be an indulgence of another kind. We're trying to take responsibility. And it's very meaningful to think about our past lives' responsibilities, because Kabje Zopa Rinpoche often gives examples of animals who eat other animals as their daily activity. That's their nature. And so they get trapped in a cycle from which it's almost impossible to break, at least within that framework of that lifetime. And so this is why Shantideva has already set up in the first chapter this incredible image of the benefits of bodhicitta and the need to utilize this precious human rebirth that we currently have to actualize it. Yeah. So there are very subtle tenet presentations on these points, and it can become very, very intricate. So I've tried to give a more general sort of presentation so that the purpose of thinking about these things is maybe clearer. So has anyone got any purification stories? As some of us do purification practices already and enjoy doing them, if that's the right word to use, find them very beneficial?
Yeah, I do. In my past residence, I had roaches, and on the suggestion of Venerable Rubina, when I did my purification ritual every night, I regretted any taking away of anybody's residence or destroying anybody's residence or evicting anybody in all my past lives. And after a while, the roaches just started leaving. Well, I don't know if they started leaving, but the incidence of being born in the house decreased considerably, and eventually they were all gone. So
it's interesting, isn't it? I think what you've just described too, that kind of expanding out, which you just described so beautifully, you're, rather than taking a roach from its home, you're regretting having robbed all beings of their homes in past lifetimes, or, you know, all, many different ways in different times. And so using that incident in the present moment as a kind of key to re-access and work with the karmic sort of legacy, if you like, of a more extensive history, which is trailing behind us. That's exactly how we engage a dynamic purification process. So there's going to be, Shantideva is going to be presenting what is called a general confession, and I'll go into detail about what that means. You're giving us an example of a specific purification, you know, a particular animal in a particular place at a particular time, but you've also expanded that outwards to become a general confession. Whatever houses, in whatever times, in whatever body forms, in whatever situations, beings have been robbed of their dwelling. And so that they're completely compatible in that way. So sometimes we work from the general and sometimes we work from specific, depending on what's actually occurring in our lives, because there's no better time than to engage in purification than at the very moment that the negative mind is arising. So when we become more familiar with it in terms of its basic principles, we can employ it in a flash while walking in the street. So it's really crucial. We don't have to be at home with an altar prostrating. We can do it all mentally if we need to. Right, well, we might conclude there for today, and I'm looking forward to continuing the topic. And it's really good to keep immersing yourselves in reading around the verses. So I really recommend that you spend some time dipping into the oral commentaries. And I've always been identifying my sources so that to indicate where I'm finding valuable material. But that's not to say that's the only place or the only way of finding valuable material. But it's often in those chance encounters, if you like, where we think about another quote or another presentation in one of the commentaries that we begin to see another angle on what another Lama has said. And in that way, we begin to really build a comprehensive understanding. Yeah. So it's a creative journey in that way. All right, well, thank you. So I'll throw it back to Lou to kind of lead us in the dedication prayers.
for as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings which are sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honored and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen, arise and grow. May that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land circled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until cyclic existence is ended. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers, honoring the 3 jewels. Save of myself and others, your disciples. Please, please live long. Tenzin Osul-Ita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Geshe Lobsang Doga, you with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space the Dharma of the able one in general and the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme, superior spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common siddhis. Geshe Tupten Sherab, beloved teacher leading your students toward wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path. You are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. Multiplying mantras. Chom Dain De Dejan Sheikh Padra Chom Pa Yan Dak Pa Zog Pe Sangye Nampa Nan Za Ki Gyel Pe La Chag Shelo Jangtub Sempa Sempa Chenpo Kuntu Zangpo La Chag Shelo Tayata Penchagriya Ava Bodani Soha Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha.
Thank you very much. So take care, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Ross.